Hi, good morning. This is Bob Hatton. God bless you, and I hope you have a good day today. This is a special day for me. This is the 1st of July, now 2020. Let me tell you a little bit about my life. We'll leave the Acts of the Apostles until tomorrow, and I'll tell you a little bit about my life. I was born in September 1952, and I was born, you wouldn't believe it, but it was raining on the day I was born, and it was also foggy. It was a Wednesday. I grew up in a household that was nominally belonged to the Anglican Church, the Church of England, but that didn't mean anything to us as a family. My parents never went to church. My father was a little bit of a skeptic, or even a mocker, perhaps because of bad things that he had also experienced in his childhood with the church. But I had to go to a church school because there wasn't any other schools close by. And at this church school that I attended, I heard the biblical stories, and I quite liked them, and I was quite good. I didn't understand the context and what they really meant, but I like the Bible stories. I like stories anyway, and I could remember them, and I was quite good in religious knowledge. I remember I was supposed to be confirmed, and I only went to confirmation class once. It was Sunday afternoon, and I would leave home, but I never arrived at the other confirmation classes. So I wasn't confirmed until later when I joined the army, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So what happened was that we had an auntie, my mother's older sister, lived with us, and this was 1968. And one evening, she was ironing in the kitchen, and I remember hearing something, a crash, and went into the kitchen. The auntie was laying on the floor, and she'd collapsed because she'd had a stroke. She was about 51, and that was on a Tuesday, and on the Thursday she died. And I was devastated because of this death. This was the first time I'd ever experienced someone close to us dying, and this was a terrible, terrible feeling. And I began to wonder, and I began to ask myself, is there any life after death? What does that mean? And so on. And I remember that was in February, and at Easter I went to church every evening in the Easter week, in the Holy Week, 1968, trying to look for some kind of answers, and somehow I didn't find them. I left school then shortly after Easter, I think during the Easter holidays, and I joined the army. I became a soldier. I was only 15 years old, but that was possible in those days. I did my training, and I passed out, and the army then sent me to the Persian Gulf, and I was stationed on a small island called Bahrain. I was no longer in my training. I was no longer an apprentice soldier. I was now a real soldier. I was completely disappointed with what life had to offer. There was lots of things to do. I suppose the army always offered you hobbies and so on, but what most guys did was to get drunk every night, and I started to follow them. And one evening I remember a young man spoke to me, and he related to me something that had happened to him 2 weeks previously. That is, that he'd had a meeting with Jesus, and he'd received Jesus and realized, who Jesus was, and that he died for him and so on. And so we had a discussion, and he told me what the cross meant, and that Jesus had died for me, and I need to get my life in order with God. But I just read a book by a man called Erich von Däniken, the Chariots of the God, or something like that was the title. And in this book, von Däniken, he relates that God was an astronaut, and he gives some examples of some Bible stories. So I told this guy about God being an astronaut, and tell him about various things in the Bible of which he had no clue. But I was good at at religion. I got good marks in my religious knowledge. I knew the Bible stories. So at the end, this young guy, he was quite disappointed because he couldn't convince me. And I had obviously won the argument. But as I went to try to get to sleep that night, his words kept coming back about Jesus, about the cross, about me not being in relationship with him, and about Jesus wanting to receive me. And that started me thinking. And then I met another guy who was also in this same group. And he invited me to go to church. So I went to church with him. And this was a church, an American mission church, a Dutch Reformed Church of America. And after the church service had finished, they invited me to come to an after-church service to have some biscuits and some coffee and some fellowship and some talks. And I just couldn't stand it. I said goodbye to the people, and I ran all the way back to the barracks. I was my emotions were in such a state I didn't know where I was, and I kept on thinking about the things that they've been talking to me about. I felt so distant from God, who I had always believed in. I'd always believed there was a God. I'd never been an atheist, but now I was discovering I'm far away from him. And then I decided I'd write to a teacher. I related this story in a previous Encouraging Words transmission. And I decided I'd write to a teacher who was a great example, a good example for me. And I wrote to him. I knew that he went to church and so on. And I explained to him what was happening. And he wrote back and encouraged me to keep on looking for God, because God was looking for me. And he told me about how he'd found God. And when I'd read that, it was kind of all my resistance dropped. And I asked this first guy who told me about Jesus, I asked him if he would pray with me and if he would, I wanted to start a life with Jesus. Well, he said he would, but he had no idea what to do now. And so he said, well, let's go to the church. And what he told me later, he was praying all the way to the church that God would help him, because he had no idea what he was going to do with me. But then as we almost got to the church, we met another guy and who was more experienced. And so we three then went to the church, and they led me to the Lord Jesus. I prayed and I got forgiveness and I received Jesus. It was just a simple thing. And that happened on the 1st of July, 1970, 50 years ago today. And I started a new life with Jesus. I don't consider myself to be very religious, because I don't think religion is like a picture without a frame, or just a frame without any content. But this is a relationship that I started with Jesus, and over these 50 years I've just deepened it. I told you how I became a Christian, but the reason why I'm still a Christian are great and manifold. Many reasons, many experiences we had. The army sent me from the Middle East to Germany. And that's where I've met my wife, Elizabeth, who's sitting next to me outside of the camera's view this morning and outside of the microphone. But how long have we been married, Elizabeth? 47 years, she told me. 47 years. And we've got a wonderful family that God has given us. We've got 18 grandchildren. Number 19 is just said, I'm on my way, and we hope that will happen. We have experienced many things that God has done with us, given us. We prayed over each child of ours. We prayed over each grandchild, and we have so many experiences of his goodness and his provision and him being with us. I don't know where I could start to tell you. But let that be enough today. If you don't have a relationship with God, let me invite you to take a step towards Jesus. He said, anybody who comes to me, I'm not going to cast aside. I'll receive them. So let me invite you to come and start a relationship with Jesus. It's not about religion. It's about a relationship. God bless you. Have a good day. And I hope you tune in again tomorrow. You are Bob Hatton.